Modern gaming is a pretty big mess right now, and I'm not the only one to believe that. If I said this back in the 2010s when gaming was pretty much thriving in its early half, most people would look at me like I'm crazy. But the amount of stuff that's happened in the last few weeks alone has got the entirety of the gaming community feeling very pissed off right now. So let's recap a bit. Sony nearly killed Helldivers 2 through corporate greed, destroyed its reputation in a matter of hours, and we're still dealing with the damage to this day as 170 countries have now lost access to it. Xbox not only laid off 4 whole studios, but also laid off a studio that made one of the most successful Xbox exclusives of last year, bringing the existence of the company into question. Ubisoft has been taking L after L recently as Star Wars Outlaws and Assassin's Creed Shadow are being swarmed with controversy, especially Shadows right now, and recently, EA has come out with the smart idea of adding goddamn advertisements into a $70 game that is barely likely to function properly on launch. Can these companies just not screw up for like 5 minutes? At least? Because of all this nonsense, gamers are either doing one of two things right now, evacuating to other games like indie games or falling back to past games. That's actually the reason why I began to make Skylanders content in the first place. I had just gotten so tired of modern games and their sleazy practices in subpar titles that I decided to find other things to play. And one of those games just happened to be Have a Nice Death. Have a Nice Death is a 2D action roguelike made by Arc Games, where you play as Death, the overworked CEO of Death Incorporated, because his top executives, the Sorrows, have been running rampant on Earth, which has caused the company to spiral out of control and for our friend Death to go a little stir, to say the least. In order to take reign of his company back from the Sorrows and get some form of a break, he takes up his scythe and obituary book thingy to confront the Sorrows and put an end to the insanity and save his company, along with the rest of the employees who are here to help along the way. Have a Nice Death is one of the rare games where there's no microtransactions to be seen, but it's still really fun to play, and even though I've only played for a couple of hours, I think it's one of the best games I've ever played. But I think it's best to explain why I like this game so much, so with that out the way, let's get to slashing. Now, before I get to gushing about how great this game is, I first have to explain the game's art style, and all I really have to say is this game looks drop-dead gorgeous. Even though most of it consists of whites, blacks, and grays, the backgrounds all have some sort of charm to them, and when it does use color, it isn't too jarring and it still ends up looking fantastic. It still stuns me how beautiful this game looks when it uses so little color, and it's helped by the setting of the game itself. The business/cartoonish/underworld aesthetic that the game goes for not only opens up a bunch of creative opportunities, but it also makes each character and setting stand out. But with that out the way, I want to talk about the look of the characters and enemies for a second. I haven't seen enemy designs this varied and incredible in a side-scroller since Hollow Knight. All of them have some sort of charm and character to them that makes them stand out and unique, and the same thing goes for the Sorrows and Thanagers. Speaking of them, the art team at Arc Games did not need to go this hard for the Thanagers. Even though I've only faced a few of them as of writing this video, they all have some form of style that makes them fit in their department and make them stand out against each other. And speaking of them, in Have a Nice Death, you basically go room by room until you die, respawn in your office, and repeat the entire process. And even though this sounds extremely repetitive, it's actually far more complex than you think it is, and it's really fun to play. You cut your way through a floor of an apartment before taking an elevator to the next floor, which allows you to choose between a set of rooms that either contain a new weapon, some of the game's currency called Solary, or some other sort of goods like Ocean as curses, which serve as buffs for you, some of them coming with a debuff. There's also relaxation, break, challenge, shop, and control rooms, which are lulls in the action that allow you to treat yourself. Relaxation rooms pop up randomly and give you free items that allow you to heal, along with challenge rooms that throw fun minigames at you to distract the player from combat for a moment. Before the first boss fight, you get access to the shop, where you can buy an assortment of items from Mark, and right after the boss fight, you go to the break room, where you not only get a chance to heal and do other stuff, but also listen in and converse with some of your employees. There's even some side quests that you can get access to by doing certain things in the game, like buying decorations from Muriel using ingots, which are used for a ton of stuff back at your office, and some other methods that I don't know about. Right before the second boss of your chosen department, you go to the control room, where you can upgrade the assortment of weapons you collected up to this point with either Solary or Prismium. Speaking of weapons, there are a ton of weapons and spells that the player can find throughout the game. The basic scythe not only has 3 different variants you can choose from after your first few runs, but there are a ton of weapons and spells that you can pick and choose from, each of them having something unique that makes them stand out. They even have their own unique frenzy attack, which you can trigger after filling up your frenzy meter. But I'll stop explaining all this stuff because 1, I've only played this game for 4 to 5 hours, and 2, I don't want to put Harriet out of a job. But with that out the way, let's get to the enemies and characters in the game. When it comes to the enemies and characters, they are one of the things that I love the most about this game, right next to the music. Dr. Grimes' boss music is a fucking bop. You are probably listening to it right now. Like I said before, every enemy you encounter in the game is going to have something unique about them in some shape or form. But most of them fall into 4 different categories. The cannon fodder, who are usually the enemies you dice up with no real problems. The bulky ones, who take hits more than the others. The Thanagers, which are the mini-bosses you might encounter in a few runs. And the Sorrows, who you fight at the end of each department. When it comes to cannon fodder, I don't really have much to say. They just do the same charged attack and don't really do much. But the bulky units are where things get interesting. They don't go down in a few swings and they have more than one attack. That can range from spinning attacks, lasers, mortar attacks, and whatever the hell these guys are supposed to be. But for the most part, all of these guys that I've fought so far are really fun to fight. So let's get to the Thanagers and Sorrows. The Thanagers serve as mini-bosses to warm the player up for the actual boss at the end of the department. So you would think that most of them would be pretty stale and not have that much thought put into them. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Every Thanager is unique in their own way, each of them having their own special attacks and moves that aren't too difficult, but can still catch you off guard if you aren't paying attention. And finally, the Sorrows, who are the final thing you fight in the department. To sum them up, they're stronger, more plot-relevant Thanagers that each have their own unique personalities and interactions with Death, and once you beat them, you get another conversation where he basically tells them to get back to work. Even though I fought some of these guys, I still remember every single one. Brad, Mr. Grimes, and that little bastard at the end of the food department. All of them are really fun to fight, but speaking of personalities, there are a ton of characters throughout the game that either explain major game mechanics to you, are part of side quests, or are just borderline funny. But with that out the way, Have a Nice Death is a game with not only an amazing atmosphere, but fun characters, enemies to fight, and a gameplay loop that rarely gets stale. Yes, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't go over yet, but I'm going to leave those as surprises for you guys to discover on your own. But with that being said, thank you for watching. Like always, hit the subscribe button if you enjoy content like this, share this around so I can grow as a channel, leave a comment down below to make the algorithm happy, and I will see you all in the next one.